Welcome, everyone, to the University of New Mexico Law and Mental Health Series, weekly discussions of practice and science featuring experts in behavioral health and the law. This series is run by the Division of Forensic Behavioral Sciences of the University of New Mexico's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences in support with the New Mexico Behavioral Health Services Division. I'm Anthony Perillo, the Forensic Psychology Training Director here at the University of New Mexico. For our talk today, if you have any questions for our presenter, you can enter those in the Q&A box anytime you feel comfortable. Do know that we hold questions until the end, and oftentimes it's not possible for us to get to all of them. If you are pursuing continuing medical education credits, there will be a sign-in sheet posted in the chat box shortly. If you are pursuing APA continuing education credits, there will be a link to the survey in the chat box, but near the end of the presentation. So keep your eye on the chat box near the top of the hour. Bookmark, copy, save that link before the webinar closes, and save a PDF copy of the certificate after you complete the survey. We don't have completed certificates after the fact. If you missed last week's talk in the series, Dr. Gina Vincent's discussion of protective factors against violent reoffending among youth is now available on our YouTube channel. The recording for this week's talk should also be available on our YouTube channel sometime later this week. And as a heads up, next week we have Dr. Jennifer Chrisman, who will be overviewing artificial intelligence use in forensic psychology practice, policy, and research. But circling back to this week, I'm honored and very excited to introduce you to today's speaker, who will be discussing a judicial perspective on decriminalizing mental illness. This is Judge Steve Leifman. Judge Steve Leifman served as the Associate Administrative Judge of the Miami-Dade County Court Criminal Division from 2000 until his recent retirement at the end of 2024. Following his retirement, he founded the Leifman Group, which is an organization dedicated to advancing reforms in the mental health and justice systems. From 2007 to 2010, Judge Leifman was appointed Special Advisor on Criminal Justice and Mental Health for the Florida Supreme Court. In this capacity, he chaired the court's Mental Health Subcommittee, which produced the landmark report, Transforming Florida's Mental Health System. The report, widely recognized at both state and national levels, offers strategic recommendations to reduce inappropriate and costly involvement of individuals with mental illness in the legal system. And over the past 25 years, Judge Leifman has emerged as one of the nation's most influential leaders in mental health and criminal justice reform. So Judge Leifman, on behalf of the University of New Mexico, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your perspectives with us today. And we're very excited to hear what you have to say about decriminalizing mental illness. I'll go ahead and toss it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Perillo, and thank you for the very thoughtful introduction and for the opportunity to be here. I'm really thrilled. Also, I want to thank all the participants that are watching for your interest in addressing this issue. I'm very passionate about it. This is a huge issue. And hopefully, I think we're in the midst of really great reforms starting to happen around the country. So it's an honor to be able to talk about it. So I'm going to start my talk today about Trieste, Italy. Now, you may be wondering, why in the heck is Steve Leifman talking about Trieste? Well, they are known to have the best coffee in the world, particularly coffee with chocolate. They are also known for having the best Prosecco in the world. I could probably talk about those two topics for a good hour. But the main reason I bring them up today is because they are also known as having the best mental health system in the world. Virtually, they have very few, if any, homeless individuals in Trieste. They have few, if any, people with serious mental illnesses in their jails and prisons. And they have few, if any, individuals in their forensic hospital system. In fact, when I was visiting in October, there were more staff than patients in the forensic facility for restoration. In fact, the day we were there were only 2 patients. Last year, they only filed 100 petitions for civil commitment out of 40,000 patients in their system. And their criteria is much broader than what you'll find mostly in the United States. It's a criteria based on treatment, not just dangerousness. So how do they do it? Well, first, they do not define people by their mental illnesses in Trieste. You're not John Smith, the schizo or the mentally ill guy that lives down the street. You're John Smith who just happens to have a mental illness, just like John Smith may happen to have heart disease or cancer. And when there is an episode, they don't wait. A doctor goes to the patient's home immediately. and they will treat them on the spot if they can. And if the individual is too ill to stay at home, they don't rush to hospitalize the person. They will immediately find the person housing. They will assign 3 case managers so that they can stay with the person for 24-hour shifts. And nobody is thrown out to the street where they're left to their own devices. And once recovery begins, they are assisted in very meaningful day activities. They also will do their best to put the individual on a long-term injectable medication. And on the state of their state hospital, because it is virtually empty today, most of it has been converted into this amazing, remarkable supportive employment program. The individuals that are in recovery run a radio station, they run a restaurant, and they run this very chic clothing manufacturing plant where people from all over Italy come to go shopping because their products are so remarkable. And frankly, it's almost impossible to tell the staff from the patients. And only in rare occasions do they file petitions for civil commitment. And because they intervene so quickly and they don't wait, A, the outcomes are significantly improved, and B, most people, because they're managed so beautifully, they don't decompensate and end up in crisis. It is a truly remarkable system that clearly promotes recovery. And there's absolutely no reason why we cannot scale that type of program here in the United States. Because unfortunately, in the United States, we do just the opposite. We allow people with serious mental illnesses to remain on the streets, floridly psychotic, sometimes for decades, while their gray matter is destroyed and they become permanently disabled. Our jails and prisons have become our psychiatric institutions, and our competency restoration facilities are so backed up today that lawsuits are being regularly filed because we are violating these individuals' constitutional rights. You know, for us, housing often is a pipe dream, and a meaningful day activity in the United States may be allowing someone to smoke at an adult living facility. We have a national crisis, and it's time that we address it. I will tell you what you learn after several years on the bench is that in many ways, the criminal justice system is the repository for many failed public policies. And there is no greater failed public policy than our treatment towards people with serious mental illnesses. The fact that we have applied a criminal justice model to an illness explains why we have failed so miserably. Had we applied a disease or population health model like they do in Trieste, we would see significantly different outcomes than we do today. So my journey into the mental health world actually began when I was a pretty young judge in 2000. I was getting ready to get on the bench, and I was approached by the assistant public defender and the assistant state attorney. They came to my chambers, and they told me that there was a case I was about to hear that morning that was really remarkable, and that they would appreciate if I would meet with the defendant's parents. At the time, I was handling what you call a misdemeanor jail division, where a lot of judges start out at. So these are individuals charged with low-level offenses, misdemeanors, who are still in custody. And there's usually 3 kinds of people in this division. There are those with attached serious felonies who are not allowed out of custody. There are those that are just too poor and they cannot afford to bond out of custody. But mostly that division is filled with individuals with serious mental illnesses that don't know how to get out of custody. So the attorneys brought in this lovely couple. It was obvious to me they were very sophisticated, they were very well off, and they were terribly distraught. The mom was crying, the dad was shaking, and they literally began to beg me to get their son help. They told me that he was brilliant. He had a late onset of schizophrenia. He was now homeless, and he was cycling in and out of the criminal justice system, and they just did not know what to do. They tried to have him Baker acted, which is our civil commitment in Florida. Of course, it didn't work because our standard is extraordinarily high. It only caused him to resent them and no longer speak with them, and they just were at their wits' end. And I was a pretty new judge at the time, as I mentioned. And I think when you're a new judge, you think you have a lot more wisdom, a lot more power than you really do. And I was under this false impression that I had the authority to get him treated. And, you know, I work in logic, and I knew that if he had been arrested and had a heart attack, we weren't going to allow him to lie and die on a dirty jail floor cell. And I just assumed that if someone got arrested and they were in a very serious mental health crisis, we weren't going to let them lie and die on a dirty jail cell floor either. We would immediately get them crisis care. Well, I could not have been any more wrong. You know, when you start out, at least back then, when you started out as a new judge, there was absolutely no training on how to identify people with mental illnesses, how to de-escalate situations, how to talk to people with mental illnesses, and what to do with their cases. We really were on our own. In fact, my training went something like this, and it was from the judge whose division I took over. She said, Steve, if someone acts strange or bizarre in court, just order a psychological evaluation for competency. I said, okay. I had no idea what I was supposed to do when the evaluations came back, but I figured I'd figure it out, and I moved on. So the parents tell me the story about their son. I feel really bad. We're getting ready to go back into the courtroom, and the mom stops me, and she says, Judge, there's one more thing I need to tell you about my son. She said, not only is he brilliant, but respectfully, he probably knows more about the mental health system than you do. I looked at her. I was kind of confused. I think she thought the lawyers had told me the whole story. They had not. And I looked at her and I said, excuse me? And she said, oh, you see, my son is the former head of psychiatry at Jackson Memorial Hospital. That's our largest public hospital in Florida. As you can imagine, I was pretty taken back. I was more determined than ever to help get him treated. And we started to go into the courtroom, and she said, oh, one more thing, and which also really struck me. She said, you know, he just disappeared one day. He just didn't show up to work, and we had no idea what had happened to him. She said he was having religious ideations, and he thought that God was speaking to him directly. And so he cashed in his life insurance policy, and he bought an airline ticket, and he flew to Israel to be closer to God. And within 3 weeks, the Israelis deported him back to Miami for his own safety because he was running around naked in the Orthodox sections of Jerusalem, and they were afraid that he would be hurt. And so with all this information, I went into court, I called this case, and we started to have an amazing conversation. Now, mind you, I don't remember the exact charge, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't even a statutory offense, but it was some ridiculous local county ordinance that many homeless people get picked up on, like possession of a dairy cart, which really isn't even punishable by more than 60 days in jail. So I called this case, and we started to talk, and we had this wonderful conversation. He was coherent, he was thoughtful, he was more respectful than the lawyers. I'm thinking, hey, you know, maybe there's something wrong with the parents. He really seems okay to me. Except if you looked at him, he looked like a homeless guy that hadn't bathed in months. But when you listened to him, he sounded every bit like the Harvard psychiatrist. So I said, can I ask you a question? He said, sure, Your Honor, anything. Because he kept insisting that there was absolutely nothing wrong with him, that he did not have any kind of mental health disorder, that if I would release him, he would go see a doctor and get evaluated. He kept telling me it was ridiculous, that anybody would be in jail on the charge that he had, and he was correct. In fact, he said to me, you know, we have really dangerous people in Miami. Why are you wasting a jail cell on me? Which I couldn't argue with. So I said, let me ask you a question. He said, sure. I said, I just don't understand one thing. You keep insisting that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, that you don't have any kind of mental health disorder. But if that's the case, why would a Harvard-educated psychiatrist be in jail, be homeless, and cycling through the criminal justice system? Well, all of a sudden, he got a look on his face that I will not forget to the day I die. It was a look of complete fear and terror. And he started shaking back and forth, and he started cupping his ears, and he started holding himself while he was shaking. And all of a sudden, he started screaming at the top of his lungs, and he started to point to the back of the courtroom where his parents were. And he started screaming in sixes and he started yelling, Your Honor, Your Honor, Your Honor, you have to have that cup removed. You have to have that cup removed. You have to have that cup removed. I said to him, Aren't those your parents? No, 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 no. Real parents, real parents, real parents. Died, 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 died. Holocaust, 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 Holocaust. And they're from the CIA, CIA, CIA. And they came to kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me. And the only stupid thing that I had learned to do was to order a psychological evaluation for competency, which I immediately did. I don't know, 6-10 weeks went by. The first evaluation came back. He's already been in jail longer than I can sentence him. The evaluation's great. It says that not only is he incompetent to proceed, but he is so sick that he even at this point finally meets Florida's ridiculously high standard for civil commitment because he is imminently dangerous to himself or others. I'm thinking, oh, this is awesome. I'm going to get this guy help. I'm going to fulfill the promise I made to the parents. I'm going to move on. I'm never going to have to deal with this mental health stuff again. This was in January of 2000. Well, at the time in Florida, I needed 3 evaluations to get what we call a stipulation or an agreement from all the parties that he was in fact incompetent. So I order 2 more evaluations. He's in jail, I don't know, another 6-10 weeks. All 3 evaluations come back. They all say the same thing. Competent to proceed, imminently dangerous to self or others. I immediately hand the evaluations to the lawyers. They immediately stipulate he's incompetent. I assume I get to now order him into some kind of treatment system. And I look down and the assistant public defender has a little grin on her face. Now, I will tell you as a former assistant public defender, this is a pretty bad sign. Then she utters those magic words that just set judges off, so never use it in court. She says to me, Your Honor, in all due respect. See, we know that when a lawyer says that to a judge, it has nothing to do with respect. It's basically how they call you idiots when you're making a mistake without going to jail. So I said, Excuse me, and she whips out this Florida Supreme Court opinion, which had come out fairly close to that time. I take one look at the opinion and I almost fall out of my chair. I cannot believe what I'm reading. What did it say? It said county court judges, of which I am, have absolutely no legal authority to civilly commit or forensically commit anyone, that my only option was to do what he had asked me to do some 12-14 weeks earlier, was to release him, have him go get evaluated in the community and come back, which was absolutely and literally ridiculous. But it was the law. In the middle of the opinion, there's this huge statement by the Florida Supreme Court. And it says that we hate this opinion, basically. And the Florida legislature has to address this because this is a huge hole in the law and it's putting people at risk. And we shouldn't be doing this. That was in January. Actually, I think the opinion came out in like 1998. So here I am, stuck. And as much as I hated it, I have to follow the law. And here I am releasing an eminently dangerous man to self or others back to the community. Not only did I not fulfill the promise I made his parents, but I put him at risk, I put the community at risk, and I probably put my job at risk. God forbid something terrible happened to him or to someone else, but I followed the law. His case, unfortunately, was a window to everything that is wrong with both our behavioral health, our criminal justice system, and our civil commitment system. And it made me realize as judges, we were terribly prepared to deal with cases involving people with serious mental illnesses. We didn't know how to identify people with serious mental illnesses. We didn't know how to talk to people with serious mental illnesses, and we certainly did not know what to do with their cases when they came before us. So when I became a judge, I had no idea I was actually becoming the gatekeeper to the largest psychiatric facility in the state of Florida, and that is the Miami-Dade County Jail. Our jail in Miami-Dade contains as many beds serving inmates with mental illnesses as all of Florida state civil and forensic mental health beds combined. On any given day in Miami-Dade, 70% of the jail inmates in Miami-Dade are classified as having mental health treatment needs. My county spends $1.135 million a day. That's $414 million a year to warehouse about 3,500 inmates classified as having mental health treatment needs. Now compare that to the great state of Florida, where we spend $47.3 million annually to provide mental health services to about 34,000 people in two counties, Miami-Dade and Monroe counties, leaving almost 70,000 people in these two communities without access to any mental health services. Over the last decade, my county, through its Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, has spent nearly $3.9 billion on jail operations. Strikingly, about $2.5 billion, or 63% of those expenditures, were related to inmates with mental health needs. It's absurd, because for a fraction of that money, we could develop the best Trieste-like mental health system that would keep most of these individuals out of our criminal justice system. And the financial burden is staggering. Each year, hundreds of millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, are consumed by jail-based mental health costs, diverting dollars that could be effectively used, as I just said, to develop a much better system of care with plenty of money left over to give people a tax break, for crying out loud. And I will tell you the impact over time of failing to provide adequate community-based treatment is considerable. So we do a lot of studies here, and we have this great program. I'll talk to you about it in a minute, and we're very sophisticated with our technology and our data collection. And so when we were starting to put together a big part of our program, we worked with the University of South Florida, Florida Mental Health Institute in Tampa, because they have the ability and capacity to tell a community who the highest users of criminal justice and mental health services are. So they have these blended data sets that have lists of all the people that are civilly committed in Florida, that have been arrested in Florida, and all their Medicaid and Medicare records. And through this merged data set, they can tell us by zip code who these high users are. So we decided, hey, let's be strategic. Let's focus on the individuals that are utilizing these very high-end expensive systems again and again, and start by wrapping our arms around that population. And so we sent them the names of 3,300 people who had been arrested over 5 years, who had been diagnosed with a serious mental illness that we knew needed treatment. So we asked Florida Mental Health Institute to run the data, crunch the data, and see who the highest users of these 3,300 people were. Well, to our shock, got a letter back. It's thin. I opened it up. There was one piece of paper. And on this one piece of paper were the names of 97 individuals. These 97 individuals were arrested more than 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in the Dade County Jail, 13,000 days at a state-funded psychiatric facility like a crisis stabilization unit. They cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars, 97 people, and we got nothing for it. We recently updated the study, and we looked at these same 97 individuals since 1985. Sadly, 6 of them have since passed away. But for the other 91, since 1985, they have been arrested 4,210 times. They have spent 97,438 days in the Dade County Jail. Most of them, the vast majority, over 90%, were homeless at the time of arrest, and they have cost taxpayers tens and tens of millions and more dollars. And again, we got nothing for it. So I told you we collect a lot of data, and we have this great program with the county. And every day the court receives an email with a list of individuals who are eligible to be diverted into our mental health diversion program, our jail diversion program, we'll call it. And it's pretty sophisticated. So it's based, and it's electronic. So it's based on where the individual is in the jail. So if they're in a particular cell, It means they've been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. It knows what their charge is, so it has to be one of our eligible charges. And it knows their prior offenses. They can't have more than 4 prior offenses for felonies. And that's the list that we get. So we recently went back and we said, okay, let's look at all the individuals that are on this list that were eligible for diversion for the last 5 years. Shockingly, we identified 16,405 people who were arrested 30,212 times, who spent 1,274,920 days in the Dade County Jail. That's 3,493 years, cost taxpayers $414 million, and nothing happened unless they got into our diversion program, which was not enough to make the kind of dent we want to make. It's an absurdity. That's almost 2/3 of our jail population over a 5-year period. Remember, we're spending billions of dollars to watch this population cycle again and again. It's really the definition of insanity, where we just keep doing the same thing again and again, and we expect a different outcome. And I wish I could tell you that if we just made sure that these individuals were referred to our civil commitment system, that we would get a better outcome. Well, it turns out the civil commitment system is just as bad as our response, or was our response, to our criminal justice population. There was another study by the Florida Mental Health Institute, and what they found is that every time an individual is referred to a Baker Act facility, that's our civil commitment, as I mentioned, for an assessment, there is a 12% probability increase that that person is going to end up in the criminal justice system. And if you are assessed 5 or more times, there's an 80% chance that that person ends up in the criminal justice system, because what they found is that an involuntary assessment admission is just one more disjointed and uncoordinated intervention in the lives of people who, because of various vulnerabilities, are generally at risk for an arrest. So when it comes to the behavioral crisis system in the US versus our medical primary crisis system, what we really have is a tale of 2 disparate systems. While a 911 call for chest pains results in an ambulance or an EMT response with trained medical personnel who are usually on the phone or communicating with a cardiologist and doing everything under their power to keep you alive and well, a 911 call for suicidal ideation or a psychotic episode generally results in an armed law enforcement officer responding. Why? And why do we accept it? We don't have to. It doesn't work very well. While the United States has 4% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's inmates. 1 out of every 4 inmates in the world is housed in the United States. 70% of individuals in jails now in the United States either have a serious mental illness, a substance use disorder, or both, which has made me conclude that maybe what we really need are specialty courts for the 30% that don't have any kind of behavioral health issue, and we need a therapeutic jurisprudence system for the 70% that do. And aside from the enormous human cost of using the criminal justice system as a de facto mental health system, the fiscal impact to government and taxpayers is astronomical, providing few, if any, measurable positive outcomes. In fact, last year, the United States spent almost $1 trillion, that's with a T, in direct and indirect costs associated with incarcerating individuals. Prior to the pandemic, 1 out of every 115 adults were behind bars, and 1 out of every 38 adults in the United States were under correctional supervision. Since 1980, the number of people going to jails and prisons in the US has increased by 500%, and sentences have increased by 166%. And much of these increases are due to untreated mental illnesses and substance use disorders. In fact, people with mental illnesses in the United States are 10 times more likely to be incarcerated than hospitalized. They are 19 times more likely to find a bed in the criminal justice system than any state civil hospital. Last year, we had 1.5 million people with serious mental illnesses arrested and about 2 million incidents a year. On any given day, we have about 380,000 people with serious mental illnesses behind bars and another 574,000 under community control or probation. I find that this situation is particularly shameful because treatment works. Most of the money that we spend related to mental illnesses is wasted on acute care treatment in institutional settings such as jails, hospitals, and competency restoration facilities. In fact, most states actually spend more money to incarcerate people with mental illnesses than to treat them. And as the Miami-Dade example so clearly illustrates, the system is backwards. We know that people with mental illnesses are no more dangerous than the general population, and we know that on medication, they are much less dangerous than the general population, which also had me thinking, since we're getting rid of fluoride these days, maybe we should just put some antipsychotics in the meds in the water and we'll all be a lot happier. Our system is really out of whack. We also know that people with serious mental illnesses have much higher rates of heart disease and cancer than people without serious mental illnesses. And it's an interesting reason why. And it's because 50% of people who smoke in the United States have a serious mental illness. They self-medicate with the nicotine. Because what happens is when you have a psychotic disorder, your dopamine is depleted. And it turns out that nicotine stimulates your cognition. So people with these illnesses smoke in order to feel better. About 80 to 90% of people in the criminal justice system with serious mental illnesses are smokers, putting them at high risk of very serious primary health issues. They're much more likely to be admitted once they go to a hospital, they stay longer, and they're less likely to have insurance. Well, the good news is that this is a fixable problem. There is so much evidence today based on really great, well-researched and proven strategies on how to fix this problem. You know, before we get into the solutions, which I will do quickly because I want to leave plenty of time for questions, the problems currently facing our mental health and subsequently our criminal justice system really relate to the fact that the community mental health system was developed when most people with these serious mental illnesses were still in state hospitals. Our community mental health system today was designed around individuals with more moderate treatment needs, not around individuals who are experiencing acute and chronic mental illnesses. People who would have been hospitalized 40 years ago because of the degree of their mental illness are now forced to find services in an inappropriate, fragmented, and unwelcoming system of community care. It just doesn't work. The justice system was never intended to serve as the safety net for our public mental health system, and it is ill-equipped to do so. You know, in Florida, our police actually initiate more civil commitments, examinations for civil commitments, than the total number of arrests that they make for robbery, burglary, and grand theft auto combined. Deinstitutionalization, combined with the war on drugs, the war on crime, sentencing guidelines, and massive housing cuts in the 80s created the perfect storm. Additionally, our community mental health, our crisis system, and our commitment laws, frankly, are antiquated, fragmented, and do not reflect modern science and medical research, and our practices are in great need of reform. Frankly, not only do we as judges fail to respond appropriately to people with mental illnesses involved in the justice system, our existing response often makes matters worse. We waste taxpayer resources, we endanger public safety, and we deny individuals with these illnesses the opportunity to recover. I've been doing this now for about 25 years, and I will tell you that if we treated people with primary health issues the way we treated people with mental illnesses, not only would there be this plethora of civil lawsuits, there would probably be indictments for gross negligence. No other system would tolerate this, where we discharge people in the middle of the night without the supports that they need. And instead of blaming ourselves and creating a system of care that actually works, we blame the individual who, through no fault of their own, just sick, and we incarcerate them. To me, there is something terribly wrong with a society that is willing to spend more money to incarcerate people who are ill than to treat them. Because if we don't do something soon to redesign or reform our mental health and our justice system response, we are going to have to spend billions and billions of more dollars into this very failed system that does very little to help people recover. So how do we do this? It starts at the local level. And I'm very proud to say that New Mexico recently passed very important legislation that frankly is based on the model that we use in Miami that they used to write this new legislation. Many of your officials came to Miami over a period of time. We walked them through our program. They wrote up a new law, and hopefully over time, it will become as effective as ours have in Miami. Look, while more and more judges are becoming involved in the issue, the reality is none of us can fix this alone. It takes a collaborative between the judiciary and all the non-traditional and traditional stakeholders, such as law enforcement, the state attorney, the public defender, our Department of Corrections, Department of Children and Families, our state, local, and county government officials, our providers, our primary health providers, our administrators, family members, and people with lived experiences. We have to do this together if we're going to make this work. For many, many years in Miami, we had this recognition in my community that our forensic mental health system was a disaster and it needed a total overhaul. Well, as a result of that case I had with the psychiatrist, and fortuitously, the first national meeting of the Gain Center, which was held here in Miami, I went. It was an amazing opportunity. It was the first time I heard people talking about real solutions. And we were fortunate that we were able to get one of their last grants. It's Policy Research Associates today, known as the Gain Center back then. They sent us 3 wonderful experts, and we had this 2-day summit where the first half day we just spent mapping out the intersection between the criminal justice system and the community mental health system. And what we found is that we, so-called healthy, sane people, had designed and developed a system to perfectly fail, and it failed perfectly. It was absurd. We were spending so much money on competency and doing nothing to help people recover. But what was impressive about this summit is that everyone in attendance understood and agreed that we had this enormous problem and realized the problem was not being addressed, not because there was something nefarious, but because we were all so busy doing our jobs. No one was responsible for the system that was terribly broken. Nobody was looking at the entire system as a whole. The judges were judging, the police were policing, prosecutors prosecuting, defenders defending, and nobody looked at the entire system when in fact this population was utilizing the resources of everybody in that room again and again and again. And so for 25 years now, we set up a new system, and I will tell you, we are even shocked at how great the results have been. It's stunning. We started off with a 2-part approach. We didn't set out to set up a mental health court. Frankly, they have some advantage, but they also have some negatives if they're not done right, and they're too small. They generally only take about 1/10 of 1% of people that need the help, and often they take the wrong 1/10 of 1%. They take the people that are low risk, low need, that are going to be fine without us. No, we went big. We wanted to change the entire system. So we set up a diversion system, a pre and post-arrest diversion system. The pre-arrest, we looked around the country. The best program that we could find at the time was Memphis Crisis Intervention Team Policing, the 40-hour training program that trains law enforcement how to identify someone in crisis, how to de-escalate the situation, and where to take them when they were in crisis as opposed to arresting them. We also set up a post-arrest diversion program where we changed our screening tool. And as soon as someone would be identified, if it was a misdemeanor, within 3 days, they're transferred out of the jail and into a crisis stabilization unit. The case is reset in a couple weeks so we can give them an actual opportunity to stabilize. And then we offer them a voluntary opportunity to come into our program. And if they come into the program, they do not get rebooked in jail. We find them housing, we assign them a peer, we help them get medication and treatment and money. Meaningful day activities, many of the same type of programming that they do in Trieste. I will tell you, and I'm going to go into the detail in a minute about the programs themselves. But if I had to do this again, I would have made it a 3-part project, not a 2-part, not just pre and post arrest. I would have put in a trauma component. I would have invited the superintendent of schools as well as school board members, because when we had our summit in 2000, the research on trauma had not been put out there yet. We know today that 92% of all the women in jail and prisons today have with serious mental illnesses, have horrific histories of trauma, mostly sexual abuse. We know that 75% of men who are in jail and prisons with serious mental illnesses, also in jail, have very serious histories of trauma. Sometimes sexual abuse, more likely they were victims of long-term domestic violence, or they were witnesses to really horrific violence like a soldier may see in combat. And a young brain that is exposed to that kind of trauma is damaged even greater than an adult brain. Do we identify these kids early, get them treated, and do our best to keep them from growing up in the criminal system? No, we do nothing. They start to act out. They start to show all the signs and symptoms of severe PTSD. Do we embrace them, find out what might have happened, see if it's still going on at home because most of it's familiar? No, we punish the behavior and we never ask why. And what happens? They end up in our adult criminal justice system when they reach age, and their lives are shattered and often ruined forever. So let me talk about the pre-arrest diversion program, our CIT program. We have the largest trained squad of CIT officers in the United States. We have about 8,800 officers from all 36 of our departments. And just to give you one statistic point, because it's critical, over a 10-year period from 2010 through 2019, both the city of Miami and Miami-Dade, because we keep a lot of data, and this is pre-COVID, those 2 departments out of the 36 handle the majority of our mental health cases, probably 60 to 65% of all mental health cases in Dade. During that 10-year period, those 2 agencies handled 105,268,000 mental health calls. They diverted 66,556 individuals to treatment. And out of the 105,268,000 mental health calls, they only made 198 arrests. What happened? Well, as a result, the number of arrests in Dade County went from 118,000 a year to 53,000. The audit in the jail was reduced from 7,400 to 4,400. And we were able to close one of our 3 main jails at an actual savings, not cost shift, so far of $168 million. As a result, we see about 3,700 fewer arrests per year, which equals to about, so far, over 110,000 fewer arrests to date. That's more than 400 years of jail bed days, with a huge annual cost avoidance of $29 million per year. The other thing we discovered, which we had not anticipated, is the severity of PTSD among police officers. My CIT coordinator and her associate gets about 150 to 250 calls a month from police officers for their own mental health issues. It explains why last year more officers died from suicide than in the line of duty. It explains why police officers often have higher rates of suicide, why they have higher rates of domestic violence, why they have higher rates of divorce, and they have higher rates of substance use. You know, one thing that we had also not anticipated, because when we started to get all these calls, we realized that we needed to do something, that they wouldn't go get treatment at their department for all the obvious reasons. So we consulted with the Police Chiefs Association in Miami-Dade, and we set up a referral program. So now when they call my CIT coordinator, we don't tell them to go see their department psychologist. If they want, we hook them up with a private provider outside the department. It's not reported so long as the individual is not homicidal or suicidal. And guess what happened? Our police shootings almost stopped. I'm not saying that race doesn't play a role in a police shooting. I'm sure it does in some cases. But I believe that PTSD probably also plays an outsourced role that we don't talk about nearly enough. And by getting our officers treated, it had a significant impact in reducing police shootings. As I mentioned, we also have a post-arrest diversion program. Recidivism rates among our misdemeanor population because of this program went from 75% to 20%. As I mentioned, we screen you right up in front in jail. If you meet certain criteria, we get you out within 3 days. We get you treated, we get you case managed, we get you all the essential elements that you need to recover. The program worked so well that our state attorney allowed us to expand it to nonviolent felony cases. And it may sound counterintuitive, but it's easier sometimes to handle people charged with felonies because they're not as acutely ill and they haven't been on the streets as long as often these individuals charged with misdemeanors. Our recidivism went from 75% to 6% for those that finished the program, which is the vast majority of individuals. I will tell you, one of the secret sauce of our program is our peers. Before COVID, we had 8 peers. 4 of them were graduates of the program, and they do an amazing job. They help people navigate these complex systems. They help people reestablish relationships, which is one of the brain's primary functions, which then incentivizes people to take treatment. We also set up an alternative to competency restoration program. So if you're now found incompetent, adjudicated incompetent on a felony, instead of sending you to a competency restoration facility, if it's a lower level felony and you're not looking at long-term prison, we send you to an alternative program at Jackson Memorial Hospital, which is a couple blocks from the courthouse. And instead of focusing on restoring you, we focus on reintegrating you back to the community by getting you stable. And once you are stabilized, we send you back to the court. You're put in our diversion program where the court then monitors you for about another year. And upon successful completion, both for the misdemeanor and felony cases, the charges are dropped and you have no record. So it doesn't affect your employment, it doesn't affect your housing, and you have a much better chance of getting into recovery and maintaining recovery. We also got the legislature to expand assisted outpatient treatment to our county court misdemeanor cases, because often those are the most difficult cases because people have been so sick for so long without treatment. And we use that for this narrow group of individuals that we haven't been able to help in our regular work. And lastly, we're getting close to opening the first of its kind mental health diversion facility. In fact, I think Dr. Devoskin may be watching today. So Joel, if you are, welcome. Dr. Devoskin actually met with us about 20 years ago and helped us plan the building of this facility. Well, it's finally all done, Joel. We have our certificate of occupancy, and what makes it such a unique facility is that it has every essential element of recovery in one location for this most acutely ill population that cycles the most, those 97 types. It has a receiving facility, it has a crisis stabilization, short-term residential, it has a day activity program to teach self-sufficiency, it has culinary supportive employment, computer labs, GED, college degrees, it has a primary clinic, a dental clinic, an eye clinic, tattoo removal, it has a courtroom, it has a living room model for people that are voluntary but high users of these services, and it has 208 beds of housing. So instead of just discharging people to the street when we adjudicate the case, we will gently reintegrate them back to the community with all the supports that they need. And I'm proud to say about 2 weeks ago, our governor signed one of the most important pieces of legislation, albeit it came about from a horrible tragedy. But we now passed a statewide bill that scales what we do in Miami throughout the rest of the state so that we can stop our over-reliance on competency and help people get treated, not just restored. And I'm convinced once our building is open and fully operational, along with our other services, we will finally achieve what the Supreme Court wanted achieved when deinstitutionalization was ordered, and when the Conference of Chief Justices and the Conference of State Court Administrators recently put together a report really urging us to reform our systems. Thank you all very, very much. I went a little longer than I hoped, but it looks like we have 7 to 10 minutes for questions. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Judge Leifman, for one, of course, the efforts and work you're doing all here. I know that New Mexico has definitely kept an eye on many of the projects that have been going on through Miami-Dade, and just all of the efforts here in decriminalizing mental illness. Just one comment here, somebody summing it up said this was so informative and powerful, a voice that would benefit all clients, practitioners, and communities. For those of you that are pursuing APA continuing education credits, the chat box includes a link that you can complete the survey. Go ahead and bookmark, save, otherwise open that now so that you have that for later on. We won't be able to get through all the questions, but we do have several here so far. Several of them are getting to those points that you're at ahead of how do we actually make impact in our communities. Somebody asked, how do we convince legislation and policymakers that it is worth it to invest in community mental health resources to slow the flow of people into the legal system and keep them in the community? The criminal justice system is run as a business, so there is a financial benefit in having people go in and out instead of treating them.
I'm not sure that there's a financial benefit to the community or taxpayers. There may be to a couple providers that maybe run a jail system, but given the economic headwinds that the country's facing and some of the tax issues that we are facing, this area is ripe for reform. And nothing good is coming out of it. It doesn't work. It just cycles people in and out of the system again and again and again. It is much more cost effective. It's much better for public safety, and it's much better for the individuals that we want to get into recovery to create a system of diversion as opposed to using this criminal justice system to deal with this problem, because it has not solved a thing. I travel all across the country, and I'm excited to see all the reforms starting to happen. And trust me, if Florida, of all places, could pass an act that scales what we've been doing for 25 years throughout the whole state, anybody can do it. And it's just, it's time. You know, a lot of people get very frustrated with government, and they come up with all kinds of bizarre reasons why they don't think it's working, and all kinds of conspiracy theories and all kinds of, comments that it's nefarious. It's not. None of that is true. It's just outdated. We are still using a system today that was developed 60 years ago, when very few people with mental illnesses were in the criminal justice system. In fact, one of the research pieces I just did said that in 1960, 1950s, there were only about 10, 15,000 people with serious mental illnesses in the criminal justice system. And that's the time in which the Dusky opinion and other opinions for establishing the criteria for competency restoration was developed. They never anticipated that 3/4 of the individuals in the criminal system would have a serious mental illness. But what are we doing? We're using the exact same system when there was 15,000 people. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there were 1.5 million people last year arrested in 2 million incidents. So why are we still using the same system? What we need to do is we need to modernize. And that's what this is about. And that's what the public wants. And we end up getting this idea that we have to just knock everything down and destroy it and rebuild it. That's not going to solve any problems, but make it worse. We just have to be smart. We have to get together. We have to collaborate. This may be the last issue in America that people seem to be able to agree upon. And we don't want to waste it. And so with the legislation that New Mexico has recently passed, I'm actually encouraged and I'm hopeful that your communities will begin to come together. We encourage, community summits, because this is a county by county issue and it cannot be easily resolved with one flip of a switch. And the other thing that we strongly recommend is that the community develop a written collaborative agreement that everybody agrees on the path and the plan and the vision moving forward. And that's what we did in Miami, and it worked masterfully and it far exceeded our expectations.
Related to this, one of our New Mexico experts who has an eye on these kinds of measures, preface that it seems like, at least in this state, funding is a very significant barrier to people in the criminal justice system getting appropriate treatment for mental health concerns. Did your program need to advocate for any kind of funding redistribution to cover costs of
Yeah,
stabilization?
it's a great question. We all get hung up on money, and we all think we need to have money first and we need to have legislation first. So it's a chicken or egg, and then nothing gets done because we're waiting. And from what I understand, I don't want to misspeak, but from my conversations with some of the people that were from New Mexico, they've put money aside quite substantially to rebuild the system. I think it's based on some kind of mining or minerals that have been discovered out there. Again, I'm not an expert in New Mexico, but that was my recollection. But we did not. In fact, after we had this summit, I didn't even know what a crisis stabilization unit was. It turned out the state was already paying them, whether they were full or empty. We just had no relationship with them. And part of the written collaborative agreement was that if someone came in, met criteria, we would send them to them. And we put a whole system in place on how to get them stabilized, what would happen with the individual once they were stabilized, put a case management system into place. And the county came up with a few dollars, but we didn't need any real new dollars at first. And candidly, I was embarrassed to ask for new money at first because I didn't want to build a system on top of a system that already existed. Let's utilize existing resources and make them work better, and let's all get on the same page and collaborate. Now, once we did that, within 2 years, the recidivism among the misdemeanor population went from 75 to 20%. That got a lot of individuals' attention. At that point, we started to apply for grants. We worked with our local government. We got them to commit to sustaining our grants if we could show that it would save them money, which they did. And that's how we just built a system and expanded it to felony cases and then these other pieces. And then ultimately, because we've been so successful with 70 to 80% of the people we want to help, we got dollars through a general obligation bond to build the new facility.
Thank you for that blueprint. Although we are at the top of the hour with the overwhelming questions, I'm happy to stay on a couple of minutes more for just one or two additional questions there. Somebody asked if can defendants be routed to diversion programs if they lack capacity to make treatment decisions? Some defense attorneys have been reluctant to support diversion when they believe their client lacks the capacity to then consent to community-based treatment.
So, fair question, but this is how we interpret that law and the law, particularly around competency restoration. So restoration is only a guaranteed constitutional right if the government's going to adjudicate you. Our programs, they're not. We are dropping the charges. So you do not have a constitutional right to restoration, okay? Our program is voluntary. Once the person is stabilized, if they want to go to trial, all the power to them. In 25 years, it's never happened because there's no risk in our program. It's pre-adjudicatory. You do not have to take a plea before you go into the program, which I insist upon. In the vast majority of cases, your charges are going to be dropped. So it really removes that barrier that you have to be competent to go into a diversion program because there's no risk. And so I think we get caught up on it. This is a much better alternative for individuals. And again, it's voluntary. They don't have to go in. They do have to agree to take treatment, though, if they come into the program.
While upstream community-based approaches are most ideal, have there been ways you all have partnered directly with regional psychiatric hospital system in Florida to improve access issues that often exist between county jails and the forensic mental health system?
Yes, Florida is a little unique. Even though we're not a Medicaid expansion state, we use Medicaid dollars to fund our community mental health system and our crisis stabilization units. So every one of our local mental health providers are part of our collaborative agreement. And so, yes, there's huge collaboration. For 10 years, we met every month with all the providers and everybody. It just got too big. We started with a handful of people and then it was like 400 people wanting to meet. But we stay on top of it. We're very communicative. Everybody is relationships. We pick up the phone. We don't point fingers. Everyone's trying, and we work really hard to support each other to make this thing work, and it's working beautifully. And when the building opens, I think it will be the crowning jewel that will give us the full continuum that we're still missing.
Are these resources available to individuals without legal documentation? This person adds, they're seeing immigrant families and individuals being extra reluctant right now to seek mental health services due to possible legal consequences.
Yeah, it's a great question. When we set this up, it was not an issue 25 years ago. And yes, we'd never asked what your status was. You automatically were eligible for all the services. I don't know if we're still doing that today. I retired in December before a lot of, I was going to say nonsense, but I don't want to make a political statement. Before a lot of this was going on. So I don't know, but up until December of last year, yes, everyone was eligible, because why do we want anybody to keep cycling in and out or committing new crimes? It's not good for anybody.
As we wrap up here, a number of people have, expressed enthusiasm, gratefulness for this, many asking questions that overlap on this. How can I get this over to our state? One question that kind of integrates a lot of comments people are making, with the preface that the statistics you've mentioned are staggering. Is research being published right now so that data can be used to convince legislators and create change in other states?
Yeah, all the most, if not every grant that we ever get comes with you know, a research component and data publication. So we have published a lot. I will tell you, with the new facility, we've already reached an agreement with the University of Miami's Population Health Department, and we're going to do a massive system-wide research in the new facility. We're using one of the top economist in the country that does this kind of research. And so we will be able to tell everybody what it costs not to provide these services, what it costs to provide, and what the economic benefit is going to be by providing this high level of care. So you're going to have to stay tuned, but that will be published. And the other thing that we're going to do with the building, because we all know this as well, there is a huge problem in workforce. At best, people are running 60 to 70% with enough staff. I mean, they're 30 to 40% short on staff in behavioral health. So we're going to turn our facility into a workforce development facility. We will offer internships with every discipline, whether it's psychiatry, whether it's primary care, whether it is nursing, social work, administration, because we want to train and hire the best people we can. And we think we can do it because this building is so amazing. It'll attract some of the best minds in the country. And we want to teach them and keep them local so that we can lift our entire community system, which really doesn't necessarily always have the best people working at it. So there's a lot that needs to be done. We're going to try to do a lot through this facility. But I will say New Mexico is on the precipice of they already passed the legislation. Now they're in the planning stages. And so if you're interested, you may want to reach out to the Supreme Court. The interesting thing that the legislature did in New Mexico is they put the responsibility to implement this law on the court. Ours is not that way. But I think there's an opportunity. There's no overhead. You can trust it more. The money will probably be spent more effectively and efficiently and without any issues that people need to be concerned with. So I would be reaching out to your Supreme Court, telling them that you want to help them implement this law and that you're excited and that this is a great opportunity, and I'll put a shameless plug in, and, they can call Steve Leifman. They know me well, and we're happy to come out there and help implement the law as well, since it's based on our program in Miami.
Thank you so much for that offer. And Judge Leifman, thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and this program with us today at the Law and Mental Health series, as well as all your contributions in this next phase of your career. A
Um,
very important topic that many people from many states are advocating for.
Thanks, Doctor. And one thing, if I didn't do it, um, I could send you, we have this great description that the National Center of State Courts did on all of our programs that I talked about. And it's got a lot of the data that I spoke about. So I'll email it to you when we get off, and you can feel free to share it with the participants.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know several people asked about potential access to that data, so that would be much appreciated.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
that does wrap up this week's Law Mental Health series. Next week, we have Dr. Jennifer Chrisman, who will be overviewing artificial intelligence use in forensic psychology practice, policy, and research. We hope to see you next week for another great discussion in behavioral health and the law. Until next time, take care.